Let's just jump right into it. So hello everyone and welcome to another installment of This Week in Crypto. So if this is your first time here, what we do here is we hold a weekly panel where the Sentiment team and community members talk about the recent market events in crypto, but from a fundamental perspective. So we basically get around every Friday and we talk about interesting insights and market analysis that we've kind of discovered using sentiment metrics, tools, indicators, and strategies. So if you haven't heard about Santiment before, or if you haven't used our services, what we do is we develop custom tools and metrics by leveraging on-chain social media and development data and information about more than 900 different cryptocurrencies. And we compile those into new tools and new ways to understand the crypto market and the behavior of all of those different major market stakeholders. So, for example, what are whales doing for specific projects? How are Ethereum miners reacting to recent market changes? What are the teams doing in terms of development activity, and if they are, spending their Ethereum that they've gained through ICO? All of those and more information can be found on the Sentiment platform. So I definitely suggest checking out sentiment.net after or during this call. And also joining our Discord. The link is in the description of this video. If you like what you hear today, we basically talk about this stuff on a daily basis over on our trading channels on Discord. So without really further ado, I'm just going to bring it up to Brian. He's already sharing his screen. So Brian, if you want to jump right into the analysis, go ahead.
All right, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good Friday. As you guys know, there have been a lot of external factors happening with the traditional markets and to what I think is a lesser extent in the crypto markets, especially last week. You will notice these hash marks over on the right, if you're unfamiliar, these are showing what the NVT value over the last 10 days, with this being yesterday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and then 4 to 10 day average before that. So these are the last 10 days. Generally, the lower the hash mark, the better. You'll see 4 very faint trend lines here: yellow, red, blue, and green. And the lower the hash marks are compared to these trend lines, the more bullish this model is in terms of how much token circulation, which are the amount of unique tokens being transacted every day, are doing compared to the market cap of Bitcoin. Right now, what we have been seeing is a somewhat underwhelming beginning of the month because there has been a little more fear due to Corona and perhaps just a little less enthusiasm for crypto on the turn of the month. But it has started to pick up, and many may think that this might be an inverse reaction to what is going on with the regular markets and all the fear going on. But we've actually recently posted an update and done a back test to show that there isn't much correlation in either direction, whether inverse or parallel. So what we're seeing now is completely independent from the stock markets, and we are starting to see a bit of a pickup in Bitcoin's token circulation. That being said, you notice that this bar, which I'm going to make a little bigger, do 120, there we go. So this bar here, resembling the first 5 days of March, today's the 6th, and it doesn't fill in until we have a full day, but the first 5 days of March are showing that we are actually in semi-bearish territory after last month having our first neutral month in some time, after seeing a bunch of bearish months here that, as we see, correlated with what the price was doing. Once we saw a neutral month, things started to turn around. Typically, when things start to turn around, they continue on, but so far we've been seeing a bit of stagnation with token circulation, and because of that, the high of February 2020, which was 10.4K, is now only at 9.1K in March. The month closed at 8,600 in February, and we're now up slightly at 9,100, so that's a good sign. But we're going to need to see a little more token circulation for that movement upward to really be validated. Start to see a bit of a bearish divergence as we approach something like 10K if it does go in that direction. If it doesn't and we start to fall, it will likely be because we're starting to head back toward a red signal again. but this is very close right now. And in my opinion, I don't think we will see a full month of red like we were back in the mid to late part of 2019. So that's just speculation, and it's a little bit backed up by the behavior trends and what we've been seeing in terms of the rise in sentiment over the past couple months, which I think will prevent anything too disastrous from happening like we saw in 2019. So I'm going to move on to Ethereum here, which, as we can see, looks a lot more promising.
Brian, just one sec, 'cause there seems to be some sort of a noise. I don't know if it's on your channel or somebody else. Let me check who's. Okay, so it's just you talking. Okay, it might be because you're moving your mic or something. There seems to be some sort of a movement static every once in a while.
Okay, I will try to prevent any movement
Yeah,
from
that sounds
happening.
better
Just
already.
stop me if it happens again. Okay. So looking over at Ethereum, it's actually looking much more promising. We had this similar 7 months of red going on that correlated with that price retracement. But as soon as January occurred, we started to see a much higher pickup in token circulation, and that caused the price to really rocket to a high of 287. Now we're back at 236 after a bit of retracement because toward the end of February, when there was some Corona scare and perhaps a few people just selling toward the top, we noticed some top holders were doing some selling activity for Ethereum in February. That caused the price to go all the way back to 214 this month before jumping back up over the past day or so to where it was at close 236. So we're now at 238 based on the price I'm seeing, and we are getting enough token circulation to start seeing much more of a surge in price going forward, assuming that this amount of unique tokens moving back and forth continues. So this is worth keeping an eye on. I'm still pretty tentatively optimistic about Ethereum, but it is looking like the better play as long as Bitcoin can hold up. Because as we all know, if Bitcoin fails and starts going red again, everything else will plummet with it because the markets are still very much tied to what the biggest token on our market cap is doing.
Brian, sorry, yeah, can you, so it's very interesting. I would assume that Ethereum would follow the NVT sort of prediction for Bitcoin, just because I think both coins over the last week have bumped about 3%, maybe Ethereum even a bit less. But what we're seeing on
Right.
this chart is essentially saying that even though both coins have started trending at least slightly upwards in the last week, the only coin out of the two for which the token circulation has also followed this bullish trend is Ethereum. Whereas for Bitcoin, it seems like the price has risen up a bit, but the amount of value or coins that have been transacted on the network has stayed pretty much the same. Whereas for Ethereum, at least how I'm reading this chart, and correct me if I'm wrong, for Ethereum, it seems like there's been a slight bump in price, but there's also been a relatively higher bump in the actual activity on the network in terms of the amount of coins that have been transacted over the last week, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. And what that basically says is that we're seeing more of a bullish divergence for Ethereum right now than we are for Bitcoin, which is mostly doing exactly what it should be doing based on the NVT. It's following pretty much exactly the pattern that we're seeing, with a yellow neutral in February and then a slight pullback in March because of a semi-bearish signal. So no divergence there, but Ethereum is showing a divergence. Obviously, the lows are moving up, which matches what the bullish signal is showing, but it's mostly flat when you look at what the last close was in February and then just a slight uptick in March. There's plenty of room to grow for March if we continue to see bullishness like we are. And we're just barely in that bullish territory, just under these 4 trend lines right here. So it could go either way over the next few days. But right now, if we're playing everything objectively, it looks like Ethereum, and even to an extension, many ERC20s, which I was tabbing through quickly, are showing that they're getting a bit more transaction circulation right now compared to what the main coin Bitcoin is doing right now. So if you are a believer in alt season and think that Bitcoin can hold up, then alts are probably the better play as of now. But it can change on a dime, and especially with all of the uncertainty right now in the world and all of the fear happening, you just have to take all of this with a special grain of salt right now. Cool. Any other questions about NVT, guys?
No, that was quite interesting, and I think we'll jump a little bit later into a bit more of an analysis in terms of how active different holder categories have been over the past few weeks and what that might tell us about Ethereum and Bitcoin. But overall, yeah, it seems like there's starting to be a divergence between the two biggest coins in the world in terms of actual, volume on chain for the respective coins.
Yeah, and absolutely. You can even look at if you're a Sandbase Pro member and you'd like access to this. I'm happy to give you guys the link so you can take a look. I'll have to share it with your email, so just give us a DM and I'll be happy to walk you through some of the how it all works, and then some of the other coins and how they're shaping up on top of that. Because we're seeing that on top of Ethereum, there's a lot of ERC20s that are also showing bullish signals right now that are still moving up this month as Bitcoin is staying flat. So in general, this NVT model continues to be very impressively predictive, in my opinion.
Can you look at KNC and Link real quick? I'm very interested in seeing where their NVT is at the moment.
So yeah, I was about to, after this, I'll actually show what the top holders are doing with KNC. But in terms of token circulation, we're still seeing an all-time best rate in terms of how many unique tokens are being moved on a daily basis. And not surprisingly, the price continues to skyrocket. It closed at 64.8 cents. It's now at 73.3 cents as of close yesterday. And the high is 87.1 cents. So it's following what the amount of token circulation is doing right now, and we're only seeing more and more right now, as these days are even going better than what the March average was the last couple. So no signs of slowing down just yet for KNC. And then moving on to Link. Link is actually starting to show a bearish divergence. So if you have been profiting in Link and are wondering whether it might be time to take a little profit, this model is telling us that it's probably time to do so, at least temporarily, because the token circulation has actually taken a step back since last month, and it's actually closer to January's rate than it was in February. And even though Link went up in January, it was mostly due to the fact that all markets were going up because of Bitcoin's rise. In February, it actually started to get its own token circulation, which moved it up. And now in March, it's not getting nearly as much, but the price is still moving up higher because most altcoins have been moving higher. But this is more a case of being dragged up by altcoins than independent token circulation of Link being high. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it also is kind of telling that Link is kind of turning bearish in terms of NVT, because if you guys go check out insights.santiment.net, Gary actually published a very detailed analysis about what different Link stakeholders have been doing just today. And one of the things that we've noticed is that Link has appeared in our emerging social trends list for the first time in quite a few days. So basically what that means, what our emerging trends list does, is we calculate or we track over 1,000 different crypto-specific social media channels. So that includes all of the popular crypto subreddits, big Telegram groups, Discord channels, professional trader chats. And so we parse and analyze the messages from all of those channels, and we have developed them into different tools. So one of the tools that we've developed is this thing called emerging trends list, where anytime that there's an extreme spike in social volume for a certain word or a certain coin on crypto social media, it ends up on this list. And when that happened, when that happens, especially during a coin's rally, so while the coin is actually pumping, as Link has been, it can often indicate that the hype around the coin is sort of peaking at the moment. So there might be a potential for a retraction. So we have seen Link appear on our emerging trends list just recently. I don't know if it's still there. Let's check it out. No, it's
Not
already
currently.
not currently. But I think if you go to Insights and check out Gary's recent post, you can see that it just breached the list on the 10th spot of the emerging trends list. So it's not the most talked about or the most developing story on crypto social media at the moment, but it's getting there a little bit. And when that happens, especially if we see Link show up quite a few more times over the next couple of days on our emerging trends list, that means that the hype around the coin and the social pressure and popularity for Link's rally is rising, and that can often, kind of be a predecessor for a correction. So, guys, check out the latest insight about Link on our platform if you want to kind of dive deeper into what different parts of the Link ecosystem have been doing. But yeah, I'm not surprised to see that the NVT model is also kind of slowing down for Chainlink.
Yeah, and well said, Dino. Just for our viewers to keep in mind, when we tell you that there could be a correction coming, this doesn't mean that it's going to be a long-term, year-long correction. These are mostly short and mid-term suggestions based on data showing what a certain coin is doing compared to the rest of the markets over the last few days or the past week. So if we're seeing a bearish divergence like we're seeing now, this could be a short correction followed by lots of token circulation and people buying a mini dip going on. So things can change very quickly. But if you're tuning into this now and think it could be a potential time to take profit, our model is showing now is the time to do so. And it could very well be a different story in just 3 to 5 days. So these are all short-term suggestions, possibly mid-term suggestions, but not. We certainly aren't saying that Link is a bad long-term investment. In fact, in my opinion, I'm happy to say that I believe in Link for the long term. And a lot of these projects that you see here are particular ones that we focus on as a team here at Santiment because we do believe in the long-term growth of it. All right, so I'm going to show the top holders behavior now, which sort of segues into our talk of KNC and Link. And I'm going to start with KNC because as we can see in this faint light blue line that probably could be a little bolder, but I'm going to leave it for now. This faint blue line is showing that the Kyber network top holders, these are the top 10, holders of KNC in terms of percentage they're holding. They have been dumping since, it's a little tough to see, but right around the 24th and 25th. And it's really separated from the pack over that span over the last week and a half. And over the last 30 days, they've actually dumped about 6.6% of the total supply onto the markets, which is massive when you're talking about these multi-million or even billion-dollar market caps that we're looking at. That's a lot of money that they're selling. And even though token circulation, as we saw back on this NVT chart, token circulation is still at an all-time high, looking fantastic. The midterm prospects might start to be looking a little more suspect with KNC, and it might be indicating that we're seeing a bit of a local top, depending on what Bitcoin and some of the other altcoins are going to do over the next week. Kyber might be one that suffers a little more than most because of the fact that it's risen so much over the past 2 to 3 weeks here. And also because the top holders, the people who know the most and have the most on the line with their Kyber holdings, are mostly selling right now their overall holdings. This isn't on exchange or off exchange. This is total amount of holdings, both on and off exchange, they have shedded 6.6%. So that's pretty significant, and something to keep in mind when you're looking at which projects to get into. You want to find ones that are on the rise overall, and many of these are actually over 0%, which is good. So a lot of these projects, top 10 holders have been accumulating over the past 30 days here, but Kyber has been the one that has been sold off the most out of these 15 projects that we're tracking here. Now, moving on to Chainlink, I need to actually find it because it's a little faint right now. Here's our gray line. Yeah, Chainlink is right here at negative 0.5% over the past 30 days. So not a lot of significant movement here. It had a very mild sell-off occur on the 12th. So it's been a long time since the top holders have really done anything in terms of Link, and it's mostly looking pretty flat. So the NVT of Link is probably the more valuable metric to look at. And Link is showing a bit of semi-bearishness. And like we said, if you want to take profit, know that the top holders are standing pat with this token.
So Brian, can you quickly hover over the date where we've seen this biggest dip in KNC? Because there might be something that I've also noticed that we can go. So that's what?
This is right on March 1st.
March 1st. Okay, can you go to our KNC dashboards in Sand Data? Because I've seen this, I actually wanted to discuss it. It looked very clear and like a very nice signal of an impending rally for Kyber Network, but I'm not sure what date it was. So if you can like select the last 6 months and go all the way down to the exchange flow balance for Kyber. Let's see what happens. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and so the token supply on exchanges, see the giant drop right below? Yeah. So what date was that?
So the spike was actually on the 1st, and then the drop was on the drop was on the 2nd and 3rd and 4th. It was like a 3-day drop.
So actually, given that the drop in on your template is on the 1st, I would assume that it correlates with the spike in exchange flow. So essentially, what that means is probably that the bigger holders, maybe even the smaller ones, but we've seen this behavior on your template from bigger holders, is that they've been moving their coins, Kyber Network coins, to exchanges during the rally, and especially here, as you can see, around March 1st. And that sort of massive spike in the amount of coins on exchanges has correlated perfectly with the top. But also, if you scroll down one chart, this is actually what I wanted to show even better. You see this major drop in the percentage of Kyber on exchanges before the actual top. So there's maybe a few days before, there's actually been quite a lot of withdrawals from exchanges of Kyber. And we have seen this happen every now and again where, it could be market makers, it could be people that are intentionally, consciously removing KNC from supply on exchanges to artificially inflate the price in lieu or in hopes of a rally. So, and then immediately after Kyber kind of spiked massively over the next couple of days, we see the bounce back in terms of the actual amount of Kyber on exchanges. It goes back to its previous position, and that probably correlates with that spike in the above graph as well. So also kind of a very interesting trend that we've seen time and time again in the past as well. So the dip in token supply on exchanges can sometimes correlate with the rising price action, just because there seems to be less selling pressure, and also there seems to just be less of a supply of a coin, which does tend to impact its price overall. But then the vice versa is also very often the case. So when we see this massive amount of coin all of a sudden joining the exchange wallets or being added to exchange wallets, it does indicate this rising sell pressure, which can correlate to a correction, which has happened for Kyber here as well.
Yeah, super fascinating point. It's really cool to see what the token behavior is on and off exchanges, and how that can often foreshadow the top holders or some other big transaction taking place soon afterwards. So taking all of this as objectively as possible, we're seeing signs that we could be topping in KNC, and the continued rally that we've been seeing could very well be the greed kicking in because of the past 3 weeks or so of such a sharp rise. So we'll need to see the top holders of Kyber Network perhaps having a jump back up and buying back in at some point in order for us to be confident that they believe in the token to continue rallying the way it was.
So one of the things that I want to mention here as well is that even though the biggest whales seem to be sort of indecisive at the moment for KNC, if you go to KNC's holder distribution, I've been checking this out recently because I wrote about KNC recently as well. If you go to go to the main dashboard page,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second tab, the overview. Yeah, and find KNC in the list. Yep, and then the last dashboard, holders distribution.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so if you go to the third chart on that screen, it will basically show the total holders balance, but segmented by different holder categories. So let's select the last 6 months, for example, for KNC.
Yeah.
Yep, and then if you select only the what is it? It's 100K to 1 million group. So holders or addresses that are holding between 100K and 1 million. There you go. Yeah, you can see that they have dropped, or there's been a dip in the holdings right before the tops, where they were probably positioning, moving their coins to exchanges in expectance of the top. But since then, we see that the bigger guys have actually started accumulating once again. So keep in mind that these aren't the biggest KNC holders. There are a few additional bigger categories, including the one for between 10 million, between a million and 10 million Kyber coins. But some of the larger whales have actually kind of been once again accumulating into the rally even. So the biggest whales are still kind of indecisive, but some of the major KNC categories have also been less indecisive, and actually I think that there's still room to grow.
Yeah, I'm interested. It looks like this. So this is the top 100 versus the top 10, and it looks like this model supports that graph. And we are seeing a much more. We saw it jump back up at the end of February, going into March, and it's mostly stabled off since then. So it's a much different story looking at the top 100. So that's actually much more encouraging for Kyber. And just curious what the top one is actually doing, the biggest Kyber holder. Yeah, so the biggest Kyber holder is probably one of the biggest reasons we've seen a big drop off, because he personally made that huge sell off actually a little earlier in February, around the 23rd. So it's interesting to break them up into different numbers, and the top 100 is actually a pretty nice indication as well, and maybe something that we could focus on a little more. To get a little more perspective, if you are seeing a big drop off on the top 10, how it compares to the top 100 is a good side-by-side comparison.
Yep.
Cool. All right, we're about 34 after the hour. I'm just going to show a quick 30-second update on coronavirus, just because it's important to make a point considering the market conditions right now. I'm still seeing that we are seeing some correlation, but it's not necessarily with the real world impact of coronavirus. It's more of a self-fulfilling prophecy that's coming from searches for corona. And when the mentions of it go up, that tends to correlate with prices moving down, and vice versa. When the news about it gets a little more quiet and dormant, that's when prices tend to surge. And that's been the case pretty much since late January. You can see every time the price is moving up like this, the mentions are moving down. And then when there was a sudden big panic toward the end of February, that was right around when the dip started. And as the mentions have fallen off again, that's when Bitcoin has been rising again. So in my mind, there is zero doubt that the fear of Corona is impacting the price. It may not necessarily be the actual real world impact, but this is a great tracker here. If you want to see how many people are mentioning Corona per day, and you're saying that it's suddenly spiking, but the price isn't falling yet, be weary, because if people are starting to fear it and it's being searched for a lot, history has shown over the past month and a half that there's a bit of an inverse correlation here. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that's a fascinating graph. It definitely seems to be the case, though. Not just, by the way, not just for Bitcoin. I think the traditional stock market is kind of experiencing the same thing at the moment.
Oh yeah, much more so in the traditional markets. They've I don't know how many people are from the U.S. listening on this call, but the Fed actually lowered interest rates
by 50% or something.
0.5%. Yeah, it's pretty historic. That doesn't happen often. So it was a kind of a panic move to get people to stop selling off all of their stocks in fear of Corona kind of wrecking the markets. So something to keep an eye on as well. You know how the SP 500 is affecting the crypto markets, and whether there will be a bit of a temporary inverse correlation between the S&P or any stock market and what's happening with crypto, as people look where to park their money during these more trying times, whether it be crypto or gold and silver, or oil, or something else.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I will end my presentation there. If Dino or anyone else would like to take over, please do.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks a lot for all of the shares. Let's see who else is on the call. Okay, Max, is there anything you want to share quickly?
Yeah, maybe shortly, because I need to leave soon.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let me then start sharing my screen. Wait, here.
And you're live.
Yeah, okay, good. Oh no, this is the wrong one, wait. Because I have so many tabs open.
You have a lot of tabs.
Yeah, better keep it clean. So it's, for me, I do also analyze sometimes complicated models, but sometimes I like simple stuff. For Bitcoin, I was looking into it. Actually, for Bitcoin, I'm mostly follow this three. Let me move to Siemens. Yep. Yeah. Recently, as it became kind of popular with volume models. So we can check into it when we are talking about money. Okay, we can add also transaction volume. If it's Bitcoin, it makes sense for them. Yeah, and then let me remove $1 million investage. Okay. So and I'm using our platform live here. Yeah, similar pattern. I can see it. Like if you look into the last several weeks and you look back to December 19, this is how intermediately top was built. Like there was a little bit spike on lower volume or lower traded volume, like we have now, lower social volume, like we have now. So I wouldn't be surprised if we dive a little bit lower. Yeah. However, you know what follows thereafter. Yeah, and it's. From my perspective, here we need to look into big into the market. There is enough bearish sentiment and people going short and not fulfilled expectations of halving, bringing price rally. So there is enough doubt, and it's a good foot for price increase. So I would bet actually now more on bullish outcome. It is a question of time. Even though I'm the one who predicted like a top, I say it's a bearish. Now I'm thinking how you enter the move up. I think you need to do the position. Now, in Ethereum, it's a bit different. Yeah, it looks more active. The last top we've been having, it was on a growing volume. Yeah, and of course on growing volume, trading more or less. I would not consider this like a big difference. It's more or less the same. And trading volume is also quite high. And for Ethereum, actually, we normally take the elective address as a proxy for nudging. And it's stable, and it's a good one. And I've been to Paris now for Ethereum conference. So many things people are doing. It's really, for me, very hard to find a bearish reason. Like, I mean, we've been waiting for Ethereum to zero for so long time, so there is some doubt. Will it ever come to Ethereum to zero? There are just so many things being built, and some of them are working, and 80% of what's being built not aware to the wide public at all. And if you are not aware of something and it has of good quality, it's actually potential for very bullish. So I don't know. It's very hard for me to stay neutral or bearish on Ethereum. I'm learning towards. Yeah, I wanted to share Ethereum miners statistic.
Yeah, me too. Can you check maybe it's live now? Because I think so, guys. We have these. Charts which show what the Ethereum miners have been doing over time, but I think our devs have been kind of recalculating some stuff today, but maybe it's live. Let's hope it is, because I actually wanted to call you out on it, because, you know, last time I said, oh, you know, the miners are starting to dump their Ethereum, and you said, oh, this is a bullish signal. And short term,
but keep in mind, it's a mid to long term. Miners, it's like really big shift in their behavior.
Brian, can you? So we shared this this image in Spencer Noon's newsletter last week. So Brian, can you find that image and maybe share it here in the chat so that I can show people exactly how much miners have been dumping recently?
Yeah, let me check it out.
But it's been like 30,000 Ethereum that they have essentially all of the mining pools, Ethereum mining pools together, have over the last, let's say, week and a half, have offloaded about 30,000 Ethereum from their wallets. And it's, I think, the biggest dip in miner holdings since like June 2019, basically around Ethereum's last stop. So yeah.
It's a very good bull signal. Also, keep in mind that when we've built the metric and when I was using it as a kind of bull bear signal, at that time, the most used for it to go and sell it. Now there are many different use cases for Ethereum, so I think we might need to change a little bit to this metric.
This is true.
Like literally, you can, I don't know, you can stake it in the ideas are many of people now participating in sometimes weird, sometimes funny, sometimes useful DAOs. People experimenting with it again, so it's really like I don't know if it's not for 40,000 ETH for sure, but there are some use cases. So I just will need to ask devs trying to split it again. How much of this transacts moved to minus Ethereum ended up on the exchange? I remember they say it's not so straightforward to build it.
Yeah,
but there should be some way. Yeah. Anyway, from how I know the market, from 40,000, you cannot find the real usage. There are no ICOs, nothing. So it should be most likely biggest part of it was sold. So it's good. It's a really good sign, believe me.
Okay.
Question of time, of course, yeah. Anyway, I'm like switching mine screen, I think.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Thanks for sharing, Max. Oh, there we go. There's a link. Let me share my screen so you guys all can see. Okay. Apparently I can't. Give me a sec. Share the screen. And here we go. Okay, so just real quick. Oh, this is for the top 100 holders. Yeah, I was thinking about the miners sell-offs that we shared with Spencer Noon a few days ago, Brian. So if you can find that tweet or the link
Yeah.
to Spencer Noon's newsletter, just so we can show
Let me
that as
just
well.
share the document.
Yeah, cool. And in the meantime, I actually am going to add on to Maxim's analysis of Bitcoin's and Ethereum's social trends. So basically, as I already mentioned, what you see here when you see social volume on Sandbase app.santiment.net, this is a compilation of over 1,000 different crypto social media channels. So we track all of the mentions of specific coins, in this case Bitcoin, and all of its like permutations and synonyms, and we plot it against the price of that coin. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing the amount of mentions of Bitcoin and all of its synonyms on crypto specific social media channels over the price of Bitcoin. And if we go a bit larger or look at a longer time frame, we actually see that the social volume for Bitcoin is actually not that high now compared to let's say Bitcoin's 2019 top. Now, the biggest spike in Bitcoin's chatter was actually right around the bottom, and I mentioned this, I think, during the last 2 weeks call, because it's something that has happened quite a few times in the past. So when you see the spikes in Bitcoin's chatter, especially while the price is dropping, you can see it here, you can see it here, like very often it actually marks the bounce back or the start of the bounce back. So since then, Bitcoin social volume has kind of been trending downwards. There's been less and less stock. So over the last, let's say, today we've seen about over 5,000 new messages, whereas the previous high was around 9,000. But also, if we look at the actual sentiment of the crowd, so this is an experimental algorithm that we've developed where we actually try and look at the feelings behind these messages and try to figure out whether this social chatter is actually positive or negative. Whether the crowd is turning against Bitcoin or it's actually, sort of bullish. So if we look at the last, let's say, 8 months of data for Bitcoin, and you can get access to this information by subscribing to Sandbase Pro. All of what you're seeing here on graphs.sentiment.net is available for Sandbase Pro subscribers. So we're looking at this chart in particular. What this chart is showing is it's showing the sentiment of Bitcoin adjusted for the amount of actual volume or the amount of actual mentions of Bitcoin over time. So here we see that even though there's been sort of a rise in sentiment, and by the way, for Bitcoin specifically, a rise in sentiment has very often in the past correlated with forming tops. So you can see here in June 2019, both times that we've seen this huge sort of positive feelings about Bitcoin, when it peaked, so did the price. And the same thing happened here and happened just recently. So now we're actually seeing a negative sort of, or a movement into negative sentiment for Bitcoin, which I think, Max, kind of fits your idea or theory as well, that we might see a bounce back for Bitcoin. Yes, you say we might see a bit more of a downward momentum, but overall, negative sentiment for Bitcoin should actually bode well for its price. We have seen these sort of like negative cycles precede the rallies in the past. So the fact that the crowd isn't super hyped about Bitcoin at the moment might actually be a good indicator for it. So this is for Bitcoin specifically. And if we look at Ethereum, there's two things that I wanted to share about Ethereum as well, as in terms of its social volume. So number one, if we look at its overall social volume, let's see. Yeah, so its social volume is kind of slowing down, at least compared to its previous top. So you can see here that the last time the Ethereum social volume peaked, it was pretty much the top or the end of the rally for the coin. Now we're actually seeing sentiment for Ethereum rising. Now, given the fact, or keep in mind that the same pattern has occurred for Ethereum as well in the past. So this huge rises in sentiment or positive sentiment for Ethereum have actually been bearish over time. But looking at historical levels, we can see that there's still room to grow before we might see a retraction. So this is, it seems like 1.1%, or yeah, about 1.2, 1.1% seems to kind of be the level at which positive sentiment, turns into a price correction essentially for Ethereum. So for now, we're actually seeing only levels of about 0.2%. 0.25%. So essentially, we're seeing that people are turning slightly bullish towards Ethereum over the last few weeks, and that kind of you can hear Max as well saying, he can't really find reasons not to be bullish for Ethereum. So it's not that surprising. But if we keep seeing this sort of pattern on social media, specifically of people kind of turning more and more positive towards Ethereum, at some point, this sort of overwhelming positivity might impact the price negatively, as we've seen in the past for actually pretty much every top except for this one, where the sentiment was kind of neutral for it. So keep that in mind as well. And let's just quickly go over a few more relevant charts for Bitcoin and Ethereum. Mainly, I wanted to look into our MVRV charts and see what's been going on for different Bitcoin holder categories. So okay. So what you're seeing here, guys, you're seeing the MVRV ratio for Bitcoin. So what MVRV basically does is it calculates the average profit or loss of different stakeholders or different holders of a coin. In this case, we're looking at the average profit or loss of different Bitcoin holder categories. So people that have bought into Bitcoin over the last 60 days, last 180 days, 5 years, and so on, where we can hover over the chart and see what their current average profit or loss is. And currently, if we zoom in for the last year, so currently we can see that since this latest drop, most categories are actually still in profit. The only two categories that are on average currently experiencing losses in Bitcoin are 30-day and 60-day holders. So people that have gotten into money quite recently, so in the last month or 2 months, are currently down 3% or 1.2% for the 60-day category. Everybody else, especially the long-term holders, are still kind of holding on. So you can see that the 365-day holders, so people that have gotten into Bitcoin in the last year, on average, they are 3.1% up on their investment. Not great, but at the same time, they are not losing money. So there might not be that much of an incentive to sell at the moment, right? If you go higher up, so the 2-year MVRV, the average profit or loss for 2-year holders is 17%. The average profit or loss for 3-year holders is 15%. So now we're already going into the territory of people actually making quite a bit of money on Bitcoin. So for now, only the short-term holders for Bitcoin are experiencing losses, whereas everybody else is either sort of treading water or is about to break even, or they're actually in 10% or up in terms of the actual profit. On average, of course. So just a quick update on the MVRV ratio. And one other thing for Ethereum that I wanted to show is kind of not great for it. But there's so many different ways that you can look at Ethereum, and not a single chart or indicator is ever going to be able to tell you for sure where we're going to be going. However, this chart is not something that I like to see for a coin in general, and this is showing the token supply of a coin on exchanges. So currently we are seeing that the amount of Ethereum on exchanges is kind of hovering around this sort of, what is it, like 8-month high. So and let's see what that is in terms of actual relative volume. So there's about 9.7% or almost 10% of Ethereum's total supply currently being held in exchange wallets. So 1 out of 10 Ethereum is currently being held on exchanges, which you can see has been sort of an incline in terms of Ethereum's holdings and exchanges over the last 3 months. So usually we see the sort of rise in amount of coins on exchanges correlate with the rising sell pressure, and sometimes also kind of impact the price in a negative way. So it's not always the case. And especially for larger coins like Bitcoin and Ethereum, as I mentioned, there's too many indicators to just point to one and say, this is definitely what will, impact the price of a coin. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. And you can see, like, for example, here that when we've seen this sort of spike in the percentage of Ethereum on exchanges, it has kind of led to a consolidation and then a quick correction. And then when we saw the amount of Ethereum actually go away from exchanges, that's when we saw another boom. So just one of the things to keep in mind for Ethereum short term is its amount of activity or amount of coins actually on exchanges. So since we're about 5 minutes until the hour, I only wanted to look at one additional example and kind of, I think, a very good example at how you can predict tops for coins with our metrics, and that's Eragon. So I've been looking at Eragon over the last few days because it's been one of the top performing coins. I think it's up about 40% for the week. So for Eragon, there seems to be already a slight correction, and I would not be surprised if we see this sort of movement continue downwards for a number of reasons that I'm just going to quickly go over. So number one is the fact that we are currently seeing this divergence between the price and network activity on most charts. So we're seeing, for example, in terms of daily active addresses and new addresses that are added to the network, we're already seeing that the amount of activity on the network is declining, even though the price is trying to make another push. And this is very often when you see, when there's a declining amount of on-chain activity and a rising price activity, this sort of divergence can very often mean that the price is going to quickly follow into the declining on-chain activity as well. The same thing is happening for transaction volume. So we're seeing this spike in transaction volume here right around the top, and then pretty much the day later there's almost nothing. So the amount of activity on chain reverts to its pre-pump levels, and so the price just follows afterwards as well. And this is the same thing that I think we're seeing right now. So at this new top, we have seen an increase in on-chain activity and the actual amount of value being transferred on the Eragon network. But over the last few days, we have seen that dip back to its pre-pump levels. So I would not be surprised that we actually see a correlating dip in its price action as well. Now, there's also some concerning signs when we look at the actual exchange activity or speculative activity in relation to Eragon. So there's been this massive spike in the amount of Eragon being moved to exchanges right around this latest top, which does indicate a rising sell pressure. And this is one of the ways, as I mentioned, this is one of the ways that you might want to measure what's going to happen from a speculative perspective to the price of a coin when you see this rising slope of coins being moved to exchanges. The same thing is happening when we look at daily active deposits. So there's been a slight rise in the amount of active deposit addresses for Eragon over the last few days. And then finally, I wanted to look at what different Eragon holders have been doing over the last few days as well, and kind of show you that they seem to also be thinking that the rally is over. Let's look at the top 100 holders first for Eragon. So we'll look at 100 holders. So the biggest top 100 addresses for Eragon have actually been dumping into the rally. So you can see pretty much here at the penultimate top, people or the biggest whales, non-exchange whales for Eragon have already kind of been moving their coins. And then if we only look at the biggest exchange wallets, we see quite the opposite pattern, which is the amount of activity or the amount of coins being moved to exchange, the biggest exchange wallets, is rising for Eragon. So another not ideal sign if you're looking for like short-term price rise for this particular coin. And then finally, if we look at different holder categories over the last 6 months, for example, if we look at the 100 to 1 million coin category, so all of the addresses holding between 100,000 Eragon and 1 million Eragon, we already see a few concerning trends. So number one is the fact that they have dumped quite significantly or violently in this penultimate top, and the price has followed quickly afterwards. And we see the same pattern sort of appearing once again, maybe not as aggressively as last time, but there's this correlating dip in the amount of Eragon coins being held by these whales, similar to what's happened around the previous top and the previous correction. And adversely, or alternatively, we're seeing a spike in the 1 million to 10 million coin category. And this, by the way, is most likely exchanges. So if we look at the actual number of addresses that are holding this many coins, it's just 8 of them. So I would assume that most of them are actually large exchange wallets, maybe Binance, other exchanges that are, prevalent in terms of Eragon speculative activity. So there's been this huge bump in exchange wallets right around the top, the previous top, and then there's been a similar, albeit smaller bump right around this current top. So I would not be surprised, given all of these sort of spikes and dips in Eragon's on-chain and speculative activity, I would not be surprised to see the price of Eragon sort of start trending downwards. Obviously, nothing can be 100%. This is in no means investment advice, but I'm just saying, looking at our charts and looking at the on-chain activity and the behavior of different stakeholders into Eragon, we're seeing quite a bit of sort of loss of confidence among big players, and then we're also seeing a concerning lack or decline in general on-chain activity in terms of the amount of addresses being active on the network, the amount of coins actually being transacted, or the amount of value being transacted on the network. All of these combined might affect the price of Eragon adversely. So all of the different charts that I have just shown you, you can find on data.santiment.net. SandData does require a paid subscription. However, if you go to santiment.net/SandData, you can fill out a form and get 2 weeks for free to check out all of the different coins and all of the different dashboards that we have developed. We have over 100 different metrics and indicators for on-chain and social information here, including Ethereum, Bitcoin, XRP, all of the ERC20 coins, and so forth. So if you really want to dive deep into any specific coin and figure out what their biggest stakeholders are doing, this is the place to be. So with that in mind, I think we're going to call it a day, guys, because it's been over an hour. So as I mentioned, if you liked anything or everything that you've heard today during the call, I strongly suggest checking out santiment.net. The link is going to be in the description of this video. And if you also want to join one of these calls in the future, you have specific things or specific coins that you would like us to look at, join our Discord and let us know in a DM or in one of our trading channels, and we'll either get you on a call or we'll, take your ideas and kind of discuss them and break them down further in one of our future calls. So until that time, I think we guys are going to be calling it for this meeting, and I hope to see you all in next 7 days.
Cool stuff, Dino. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, guys.